Welcome. Oh my goodness, what a full house. I'm Nancy Guerra, and I am a professor of psychology here, and I'm also the Associate Provost for International Programs and the Director of the Institute for Global Studies. And tonight I have the honor of welcoming you all to this signature event that we're hosting as part of the 90th anniversary of our Study Abroad celebration. How many of you in this audience have been on a Study Abroad program from UD? Wow, that's fantastic. Well, for those of you who haven't or maybe don't know this, just to give you a little perspective about the anniversary, UD was actually the first university in the U.S. to send students abroad to study. This was in 1923, if you do the math, which was 90 years ago. We sent 8 third-year students to Paris for a full year of study, and actually they went to the University of Nancy, which is my name. We decided we need to have a Nancy lunch for all the Nancys at UD to celebrate, but beyond that, it became the format for the junior year abroad program, and today UD is in the top 10 public universities for study abroad. So tonight, as a way to honor that 90th anniversary, I am extremely thrilled to introduce to you our speaker, who probably needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him nevertheless. World-renowned guidebook author and travel host Rick Steves. And as I was coming over here, I was thinking, Rick really has one of the best jobs in the world. Some of you are probably wondering, and you might want to ask him this after, how you get this kind of a job, because I'm sure it would be interesting. He spends about a third of the year in Europe. He appears on TV. Almost every night I turn the TV on, I see some Rick Steves Europe travel show, radio, online. He writes best-selling books. Since he started Europe Through the Back Door in 1976, a business that was really just Rick has grown to a well-traveled staff of 80, a company that produces over 50 guidebooks, including bestsellers, and that's quite important and I think quite noteworthy that you can have so many bestsellers and travel guides. I know the Italy book is the best-selling guidebook in the U.S., which is another noteworthy accomplishment. He also has a weekly column syndicated by the Chicago Tribune, award-winning specials, and the list goes on and on. But what I thought about, well, what makes his job the best job in the world? And that's certainly part of it. If you think about what he does, he travels for a living, which is very important, but he also travels for a calling, which I think is very key for the whole study abroad mission and what we're doing in study abroad. And really his calling is very similar to the mission of the Institute for Global Studies here at the University of Delaware, which is to optimize authentic experiences through travel, to increase awareness of cultural and social issues that face the world, and where possible, and this is near and dear to my heart because I do a lot of work in citizen security, justice, and peace, to really use travel as a force for peace and understanding in the world, which is really the springboard for the talk tonight on travel as a political act. So before it's my great pleasure to introduce Rick, I do want to give just a quick acknowledgement to the hard work of the IGS staff in organizing this event and in organizing Study Abroad, and particularly to Lisa Chifo. Please stand up. We have to give her, I know she's being embarrassed, but who very much behind the scenes is responsible for this amazing event and all of the lectures and talks and bringing Rick Steves here for us. So without further ado, let me present Rick Steves.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. What a beautiful opportunity to come to this beautiful campus and share with you the lessons I've learned from traveling through Europe. I've spent, I'd say, a third of my adult life living out of a 9 by 22 by 14-inch carry-on-the-airplane-sized suitcase. And when I look back on that, I really think it's been time and money well spent. It's just so exciting to be able to go, outside of our borders, getting out of my comfort zone, and then gaining an empathy for the other 96% of humanity. And that's a beautiful thing that we Americans can do. We come home with a broader perspective, and we also come home, probably realizing how richly blessed we are to live right here. It's so exciting and so important, especially for students who want to feel like they've got a full and well-rounded education, to have a little foreign study in their experience. And it's fun to be here at the University of Delaware, where that is clearly a priority and the value of that is understood. So what I'd like to do today is talk to you about how travel can be a transformative experience, how travel can broaden our perspectives. And you know, I never really wanted to travel when I was a kid. I remember my parents dragged me to Europe when I was 14 years old, and I thought this is a stupid idea. And my dad was importing pianos from Germany, so I had to see the piano factories over there. And then we had to go up to Norway and see our relatives. And I was a 14-year-old with a bad attitude. And on about day 2, it occurred to me, you know, it's really not all that bad. There's different candy, different pop. I remember in Germany, especially in Germany, statuesque women with hairy armpits. I thought, you know, this is really could be interesting. And a couple years later, I was in the Copenhagen train station with my mom and dad going between the piano factories in Germany and the relatives in Norway. And I saw kids a couple of years older than me with rucksacks and near-rail passes and exciting destinations clicking up on the reader board. Remember those classic old train station departure boards? Berlin, Amsterdam, Stockholm. Those kids, Europe was their playground. And I remember looking at them and thinking, that is the epitome of freedom. And then I looked over at my mom and dad and I thought, I don't need you guys for this. And I was a piano teacher back then, and you know, kids didn't practice in the summer, so I just said, I'm not going to struggle with this. I'll see you in September. I'm going to Europe. I vowed to go to Europe every year for the rest of my life, and I have. At first, it was just for fun, and then I was realizing I was learning from my mistakes. And it was really clear other people were making the same mistakes I had made the year before. And I thought if I could just package the lessons I've learned from my mistakes into a talk or a book or something like that, other people could learn from my mistakes rather than their own and have a better trip, and I'd have a good excuse to go back to Europe every year and update my material. And I've been doing that for 30 years. And I didn't have a master plan, but when I look at it, it's sort of like my teaching has kind of been like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? First you cover your basic stuff, and then you get creative and fulfilled and altruistic and find meaning in life and all that. But first you got to get clothes and food and a roof over your head. So in the 80s, I was talking about budget travel skills, how to catch the train, how to get a good bed, how to pack light, how to stay safe, bottom line stuff. In the 90s, I was all excited about moving up on that hierarchy, and I wrote a book called Europe 101. And I was all excited about teaching an appreciation of history and art and culture and wine and cuisine. And that made a lot of sense to me. And then ever since about 9/12, I find myself really excited about teaching something even higher than appreciating the history and the art. And I think that is bringing home a broader perspective, bringing home an empathy with the other 96% of humanity, coming home and understanding how exciting this world is, to celebrate the diversity on this planet rather than fear it. So that's been kind of my theme for the last decade. And I wrote a book called Europe, Travel as a Political Act. And Travel as a Political Act is the kind of textbook for today's talk. And I'm not going to talk really fast because I think we have 90 minutes, and you can get the book and read the whole story if you want to. But I just want to talk about how this really makes so much sense to me. First of all, I remember when I was a kid, I was idealistic. I wanted to work hard and contribute, and I didn't know if teaching travel was a noble thing to do. I mean, my earliest images of travel, I don't know about you, but if you think back on it, my earliest images were rich white Americans on luxury cruise ships in the Caribbean. And they would stand on the deck and they'd throw their nickels off the deck and they'd photograph what they called the little dark kids jumping for those coins, you know. And that was just what you did as an American traveler. You'd go out there and flaunt your affluence. And I just thought, that's not my idea of travel. That doesn't bring us together. That exacerbates the difference. Ironically, you travel all the way over there and it exacerbates the difference between us and them. And that same notion of travel persists to this day. I mean, for a lot of Americans, travel is still see if you can eat 5 meals a day and still snorkel when you get into port. Now, when I say that at a cruise convention, people fidget nervously in their seats and wonder, where's he going with this? But, you know, I don't say that in a judgmental way. I just say that's not travel. It's hedonism. And I don't say that in a judgmental way either. I got no problem with hedonism. I'm a Lutheran. But I want to travel in a way that brings me together, and that's what I want to promote and teach and so on. And if you travel with the right attitude, I think it makes you closer to the rest of the world. That's just a beautiful thing. So that's what I want to talk about right now. And, you know, as a travel teacher, my responsibility is to bring home the magic. If I'm making a TV show or leading a tour or making a guidebook, I want to help people find those magic moments. That's kind of what it is, magic moments on the trip of a lifetime. And it's all over the place. Now, my beat is Europe. I see Europe as the wading pool for world exploration. Go there first. That's what I focus on. And then you can go to more, you know, exotic or more culture shocky kind of places. But let's start with Europe. And, you know, you got incredible natural wonders there. Teaches you an appreciation of nature. You go to Europe, and they're so accessible. I mean, you can be tight roping on a ridge high in the Alps. First of all, you ride the lift up for breakfast at the restaurant on top of the peak, right? And then you walk out on the ridge. 3 hours, tight roping here. On one side, you got lakes stretching all the way to Germany. On the other side, you got cut glass peaks, the most incredible alpine panorama anywhere, the Eigermunk and Jungfrau. Ahead of you, you hear the long legato tones of an Alp horn announcing that the helicopter-stocked mountain hut is open. It's just around the corner. And the coffee schnapps is on. That sort of thing, you know, it's just you're up there. And you love it. And that's the sort of a magic experience anybody can have. Cultural experiences. For 25 years, I was a tour guide leading my groups around Europe. And I found that a lot of Americans were sort of put off by somebody else who's excited about something culturally that we're not that into. Are you saying we're wrong? We fought and died for our way of, for your way of life, and I'm not going to sit here and let you tell me that, you know, that Christmas is not 25, 12, 13. In Europe, they go 25 or 12. We go 12, 25, and they go from little to middle to big. It's just not better or worse. It's just the way they do it. They flip-flop the dates. The English don't drive on the wrong side of the road. They drive on the other side of the road. To them, it makes sense to drive defensively, approach traffic with your sword hand on the inside, defend yourself. Come on. And cheese, I mean, you know, Europeans are very excited about cheese. Now, that doesn't mean they're better than us. It just means they're excited about cheese. A lot of Americans are saying, we're just as civilized. It's not the issue. It's like Monday morning show and tell in 3rd grade. You know, kids show off what they really did fun this weekend. They want to share it. Europeans are evangelical about cheese. Now, for me, it's no big deal. I grew up thinking cheese is orange in the shape of the bread. Here you go, cheese sandwich. You go here, and the cheese shops are a festival of mold. If you've seen my TV show, I've got a friend in Paris. I'm her bumpkin. She loves to take me shopping in the morning. She's a restaurateur, and she loves to just turn me on and wow me with all the French cuisine, you know. And she takes me into a cheese shop, picks up a moldy wad of goat cheese, takes a deep whiff. Oh, Rick, smell this cheese. It smells like the feet of angels. Come on, it's just stinky cheese. Well, she's excited about this, you know, exotic cheese. That's cool. I like it. I don't need to go home and be crazy about it, but it's nice to know somebody is. History can be fun when you travel. It becomes meaningful. I got a history degree when I was a student at the University of Washington accidentally. Didn't have any plans for it. I remember waking up in the dorm one morning and it occurred to me, hey, I got 7 history classes under my belt, 3 more, and I am a historian. Let's push on through. It was storytelling. I couldn't believe they were giving us credit for it, you know? And it's because I had been there. I had been there, and I had seen it. And I can see that we are part of history. We're not observing it. We're part of it. It's unfolding all around of it. And in your travels, you can find that. I mean, I happened to be in Berlin on the opening day of their new parliament building, the Reichstag building. Very exciting. Now, this is the building that was bombed out in the war. And actually before the war, and it was just abandoned, and for a whole generation it was on no man's land, that, you know, the Berlin Wall, and all of a sudden Germany is united, the Cold War is over, the government goes from Bonn back to Berlin, and they need a new parliament building. In good European style, they don't bulldoze the old bombed out building, they renovate it, and they incorporate a nice glass modern dome into the rooftop, And they've got their new Parliament building that has a connection with their past. It's free, open long hours, designed for tourists, our German citizens, but tourists are more than welcome to go in there. Climb the spiral stair all the way to the top. Powerful architectural symbolism. The citizenry of Germany is literally going to look over the shoulders of their congresspeople, their parliamentarians or whatever, and keep an eye on what they're doing. They've been jerked around too much in the last century, and they're not going to let it happen again. So the politicians are down there, and the German citizens are above them. I was up there on top of that dome on opening day, surrounded by teary-eyed Germans. Now, anytime you're surrounded by teary-eyed Germans, something exceptional is going on. And I was clued into this. What is the big deal? This was the opening of this building was the symbolic closing of an ugly chapter in the history of a great nation. No more division, no more communism, no more fascism. A new Capitol building starting a new century, looking into a promising future. And most of those teary eyes were old enough to remember their great city in rubble in the late 1940s after World War II. They had built it up, they had put their country back together, they had learned some lessons, and they had a new Parliament building. It was exciting. I was really caught up in it. And I looked around at the other American tourists up there, and it occurred to me, not one of them had a clue. It saddened me. I thought, I'm living in a dumbed-down society. I don't want to live in a dumbed-down society. But we have powerful forces here in the United States that would find it convenient if we're all just dumbed down. Just go shopping. We'll take care of it. We have never been confronted with such complicated problems, I don't think, and we need to be engaged. And I challenged myself. I promised myself in my own work as a travel writer and a tour guide or whatever, I'm going to expect my travelers and my viewers and my readers to be engaged, to be smartened up. It's not in your financial interest to do that, but it's important for us, and all of us in our own realms can expect people to be engaged and smartened up. I think it's important. And boy, you'll find in travel, they make much more money from you if you just go shopping and lay on the beach and worry about your frequent flyer miles and your duty-free stuff, okay? That's not bad in itself, but if it bullies you out of a meaningful experience, you're the loser. The neat thing about travel also is that you meet people you wouldn't meet here. I love it. I love to get out of my comfort zone. I mean, this is a pretty homogeneous crowd here, and my world is just as homogeneous, you know. But when you go traveling, you find yourself the oddball, which is really fun, I think. It doesn't need to be an earth-shaking encounter. It's just fun, goofy stuff. I mean, I was in Italy recently, and this kid was just staring at me. It's kind of rude. Finally, his dad said, "Excuse my son. He stares at Americans." And I asked him, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Well, last week we were having our hamburger at McDonald's, and my son, noticing the fluffy white bun, asked me, 'Dad, why do Americans have such soft bread?' And the dad said, 'Son, it's because Americans have no teeth.'" So another poor confused kid looks at every tourist to see if they've got teeth. I showed him my teeth to dispel that little bit of misunderstanding between peoples, you know. But, you know, that's a goofy example, but there's all sorts of goofy misunderstandings between people. I remember back in the Cold War, I was traveling in Bulgaria, and I made some friends, and we sat down, and we started talking, and they said, "So, okay, in the United States, if everything is private property, how can you go anywhere without trespassing?" They just were really struggling with that, you know, and we have similar confusion with other peoples, and it's fun to get together and share these ideas. One of my favorite countries is Ireland. And I think I like Ireland in part because in Ireland I have this sensation that I'm understanding a foreign language. I wish I spoke another language, and I know the foreign language teachers in here wish I did too. It's a very important thing. But, you know, I always say if you speak just English, you can still have fun abroad. And I like Ireland because these people have this wonderful gift of gab and this wonderful art of conversation. And you want to get to these Gaeltachts. A Gaeltacht is literally a Gaelic-speaking region. It's where the government subsidizes the survival of the traditional lifestyles. It's not a smart economic move in the short term. We would never do it here in our country. But over there, they help the small farms stay alive, and they subsidize the traditional ways of life, and they want a place for their kids to go in the summer to learn from where they came culturally. It's a beautiful thing. Mostly we on the west coast of Ireland, where people stand on the bluff and they look out at the Atlantic, and they say, the next parish over is Boston. You go out there and you just forget your itinerary. You're meeting the coolest people, and they love to talk. I got into a conversation with these guys. After a while, I asked the guy on the left, asked him, were you born here? He paused and he thought, and he said, no, it's about 5 miles down the road. A little while later, I asked him, have you lived here all your life? He said, not yet. I've been thinking about why I'm so charmed by the Irish and their gift of gab, and I think it might be, they speak Gaelic as a first language. A lot of Americans don't realize it, but more people are speaking Gaelic now than a generation ago. The little languages are on the rise in Europe because of the unification of Europe. And they'll be talking to each other in Gaelic, and the tourist is oblivious to that. We walk up, they turn to us and talk English, and then we say goodbye, and they flip back into their Gaelic. And my personal theory is that they think in a Gaelic template, and then they translate literally, and then they have this wonderful, flowery, beautiful way of communicating. One way or another, the Irish are very fun to talk to, and they love to talk. Now, the big news in Europe is the unification of Europe. Europe has become a free trade zone of 400 million people, producing the same $15 trillion a year that we do here in the United States with 300 million people. In Europe, a lot of Americans are a little concerned about the Europeans. They don't make as much money as us, so a lot of Americans are quick to put down their socialism and how miserable they must all be. They produce less than we do per person. There's no question about that. It takes 300 million of us to produce what 400 million of them produce, $15 trillion of stuff every year. But by any honest measure, Europeans produce as much as we do per hour. They just choose to work 20% fewer hours. It's not a right or wrong thing, It's just they choose not to work themselves into an early grave. And for some reason, we buy into this notion that we got to work, work, work. We have the shortest vacations in the rich world, and that's just what gets us excited, I guess. When I'm in Europe, it's a little bit annoying. I mean, I talk to these guys. It's Wednesday afternoon, and I come up to them. This is in Amsterdam, and I say, hey, what's going on? Is there a festival? And they say, yeah, it's Wednesday. They're just living life. It's their choice. The Europeans are better at that. Certainly they work hard, but they also play more than we do. I've got a friend in Seattle who's running a little movement. He's got a movement going on, and it's a very small movement. It's called Take Back Our Time. And it's designed, he's trying to explain to Americans that we have the shortest vacations in the rich world, and it's not required. And his national holiday is October 23rd, because by his estimate, if you were a European working as hard as we Americans do, October 23rd would be the last day you got to go to work this year. I know that's annoying, but that's just a reminder. I'm certainly glad I'm running my business here in the United States. I would hate to run my little entrepreneurial guerrilla adventure in Europe. It's fun to employ people here, and I can turn on a dime, and we have a wonderful environment for working, but Europe has some things we can learn from also. You hear a lot about the financial crisis, and everywhere I go, I hear people asking me, is it okay to travel in Greece or Portugal or Italy, And I think, sure it is. We've got tours to Greece all the time, and they're doing just fine. I'm going to be over in all those countries this summer and haven't given the economic chaos a second thought. Who names these things? The economic crisis. We all just accept it. Economic crisis, what does that mean? Well, first of all, 90% of humanity wishes they had our economic crisis. We are filthy rich on global standards. Half of humanity, actually half of the people on this planet, are trying to live on $2 a day or less. There's the crisis. Now, in the last year, our society has been in crisis, and we're only growing at 2%. See, we're just not growing fast enough. I certainly don't want to make light of anybody's problems if their unemployment or their business went out, but as a society, we're growing, and we're already dominant. I would say if there's a crisis, it's a crisis of distribution within this wealthy corner of the planet. Now, Europe has a similar economic crisis going on. Here's my tour guide's take on this. I think in Europe and in the United States we have a similar problem. We've kind of conned ourselves into thinking we're richer than we are, and for many years we've been consuming more than we've been producing, and you can only do that for so long until you can't, goose the machine anymore or take any more from the future, and you got to reckon with reality. We are living beyond our means. Now, we've got lavish entitlements here in the United States. They've got more lavish entitlements in Europe. These were all sustainable and reasonable when they were devised, when they were young societies and people didn't live very long. When those entitlements and when our entitlements were made, a lot of young people working, not many people living to retirement, and those who didn't live very long. You could sustain that. When you become successful, affluent, well-educated, the natural result is you have fewer kids and you live longer. That's the result. Now, today, Europe is the most successful place. They have the longest lifespan and the most geriatric society. So that pyramid of demographic makeup is flip-flopped, and now you have a few people working. A lot of people live into retirement, and they just live way too long. It's not sustainable. It's simple arithmetic. You can't do it. Now, the sorry lot of politicians on both sides of the Atlantic is to stand in front of their electorate and say, sorry, you don't get the promise. I know we promised you. Your parents got it. You spent all your work life trying to get this. Your friend got it a couple years ago when he or she retired, but you don't. You got to work another 10 years, and we're not even sure if you got a retirement waiting for you then. That's enough to make people really mad, and that's happening in Europe. And there's a lot of demonstrations. That would make you and me mad. I could imagine burning a Starbucks if somebody told me that. You go down in front of the Parliament building and you turn over a car and you set it on fire. That's what they do. Millions of people get together and march. It's the European way of venting. I think it's healthy. It's part of their whole fabric of their societies. When they're frustrated and angry, they get out and march. La manifestation. That's just way too much exercise for most Americans. We have the same frustrations, but we go home and find a TV station that affirms our frustrations, and then we just shake our fists in unison. That's how we demonstrate, okay? So we're in this situation now, which is difficult, and we have to recalibrate, and it's not going to be easy. And typically, like the Europeans and like Americans, if a politician tells you the truth, you throw them out until somebody tells you something you like, and it just kicks it down the road a little bit farther. So basically, we're going to have this kind of adjustment for many, many years, and I wouldn't let it affect your travels. Really, it's really not an issue for your travels. Big news in Europe is the movement to the east. A few years ago, nearly the entire Warsaw Pact country joined the EU. Overnight, the geographic center of Europe shifts from Belgium to the Czech Republic, and you got 100 million new capitalists. It's really quite exciting. This picture here reminds me of how bleak it was in Poland and what a festival of pent-up entrepreneurial spirit it is these days. I remember when, back during the Cold War, it was so demoralizing that people in Poland were taking their windshield wipers in with them at night. Why? Because they had a stupid command economy. Somebody upstairs forgot to order windshield wipers. They ignore supply and demand. Demand exceeds supply. Thieves get wind of that. They'll steal your windshield wiper and sell it for a fortune on the black market. That's how black markets work, why they're there. Well, today, the laws of supply and demand are kicking in. There's more than enough windshield wipers to meet the demand, and in Warsaw, people are leaving their wipers on all night long. It's a great time in Eastern Europe, and it's fun to travel there. One of the cool things about traveling in Europe is the diversity. You just drive a couple hours and you got a whole different kind of culture. It's really exciting to me. Now, you would think as Europe is uniting that it would become all melded together. We're really excited about the value of foreign study here, but it needs to be constantly, reminding our public and everybody that it's worthwhile. In Europe, there's no discussion about it. They've got even in tight economic times, they've got a well-funded program called Erasmus that the European Union funds that pays for students and teachers to study abroad because they know that makes the societies stronger and smarter. When we're thinking about the diversity in Europe with all of this lack of borders, one currency, people working and studying abroad, people intermarrying between regions and so on, you'd think it all become the same, homogenous society. But the counterintuitive result of all this unification of Europe is the regions are actually more vivid now than they used to be. That's because there's three sort of loyalties: the region, the nation, and Europe. And in our lifetime, the stress has been between regions and nations. But as Europe is uniting, the nations are withering away, and the regions no longer threaten all of Europe, you see. You know, a long time ago, if you lived in Brittany, in the west, the Celtic part of France, and you had a baby and you named the baby a Celtic name, that baby would lose its French citizenship because Paris didn't want to have Celtic culture going on within France. They were threatened. A long time ago, the Basques were threatening Madrid, the Catalonians were threatening Madrid, the Scottish and the Irish were threatening London. Now, as these nations are withering away and Brussels is becoming stronger, the people in Catalonia aren't such a threat to anybody. You can secede from Spain, but you cannot secede from Europe. If you look at any city hall anywhere in Europe, you'll see three flags: the region, the nation, and Europe. If you ask a friend in Munich, where are you from? He could say, I'm Bavarian, or I'm German, or I'm European. Ask a friend in Barcelona, where are you from? And he could say, I'm Catalonian, or I'm Spanish, or I'm European. I tried to sort this out. I was talking to my friends in Barcelona. I said, okay, so you're the region of Catalunya, is that right? No, we're not a region. That implies we're part of Spain. We are a nation without a state. And get that right, okay? When you travel around Europe, you will see the results of this. For the first time since 1707, there's a parliament building in Scotland instead of London for the Scottish people. This is big news. Why? London is not that threatened by the Scottish anymore. In Franco's day, if you danced the Sardana dance in front of the cathedral in Barcelona, you would be locked up. Today, of course, people are dancing the Sardana after Mass on Sunday in front of the cathedral in Barcelona. People are teaching their kids Catalonian, and people can wave the Catalonian flag instead of their soccer team flag, which is what they had to wave back in the days of Franco. People are teaching their kids Catalonian as their first language at school and at home. They learn Spanish as a second language. In fact, if you go to a Subway sandwich shop in Madrid, you're likely to see a menu with 4 languages on it, each of them a Spanish language. That didn't happen a generation ago. If you go to an ATM machine here in Barcelona, you'll find on the top button of the language selections Catalan for the local people. Then you'll find Espanol for most Spanish people. Then you find Gallego for the people of northwestern Spain. And then you got Euskara for the Basque people of Spain. 4 different Spanish languages. Then German, French, English, and a button for everybody else. If you were to go to an ATM machine in Basque country, you would see the same 4 Spanish languages, but Basque would be up here, but they would certainly have Catalonian up there. Because these victims of the tyranny of the majority have solidarity with each other, right? And they just, out of respect for their Catalonian fellow victims of the tyranny of the majority, they would have Basque and Catalonian up there just as much as Espanol. I was traveling in Ulster, Northern Ireland. It's kind of bleak. There's not much tourism up there. I met a lot of Catalonians and a lot of Basque people traveling in Ulster. Asked them why. Oh, we just like hanging out with the Catholics up here. They can relate to us, you know, the minority under the Protestant rule. It's fascinating to be tuned into this in your travels. This man's name is Armin Walsh. And Armin is the Indiana Jones of Tyrolean archaeologists. He is full of energy and creative ideas, and when he needs money, he lives in Austria, in the west, in the region called Tyrol. He does not go to Vienna. If he needs money, and what he likes to do is he renovates castles and turns them into museums. He goes to Brussels when he wants money. And he doesn't say, I got a great project for Austria. He'd go home empty-handed. He says, I've got a great idea for the Tyrol. And Brussels gives him plenty of money. Why? Because Brussels is interested in funding ethnic regions, not fake political borders created after wars. Austria after, World War I, I guess. The Tyrol ignores those borders. In fact, Tyrol includes parts of Italy and parts of Austria. When you join the European Union, you're either a net giver or a net receiver. The wealthier countries give more than they get out, and the poor countries get more than they put in. That's because Europe wants to have, it's only as strong as its weakest link as a free trade zone, and they want to build up the poorer countries so they can all work together well. And they have that big free trade zone in order to compete with the free trade zone called the United States. Now, Now, when you go to Europe, the poorest four countries a little while ago were Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Greece. When I was first traveling in those countries, there were no freeways in any of those countries. And now they're laced with freeways. And every time you see a freeway in one of those countries, you see a sign on it. This is in Ireland. It says, you see the European flag, and then it says, this project has received 85% financial assistance from the European Union. That would mean France and Germany, basically. So France and Germany paid for this road, and the Irish are going to use it. Now get on board, work. We're competing with the United States. Just like the United States, when we built our interstate system back in the Eisenhower days, Mississippi got the same quality roads as New York, even though the people would have paid differently. Just the philosophy was we're going to have that infrastructure the same for all of us. When you travel around Europe, you see that. I was recently in Greece coming down to the Gulf of Corinth. All my life I've been going to the Gulf of Corinth, and there's been a funky little ferry boat to cross. One year I come there, and bam, there's a big, fancy bridge. When I look at this bridge, I think that is not a Greek bridge. The Greeks would never build this bridge. They would take that ferry for the rest of time, okay? This is a German bridge built in Greece to get German trucks over the Gulf of Corinth so they can sell their gummy bears down in the Peloponnesian Peninsula. It's just how it's working in Europe, and I think it's quite interesting to learn about. Europe is investing in its infrastructure like we have a hard time imagining, faster and faster trains. This is the new train station in Berlin. Every city has to have a drive-through train station now. In the old days, in a more genteel time, you could take the train into a dead-end station and pull out, and then carry on. No way. It's underground now. It's like that. I was just on a train in the French countryside going 300 kilometers an hour. The speedometer in the passenger area only turned on when it exceeded 300. That's when they were proud. That's about 200 miles an hour. It was silent. It was smooth. The beautiful, pristine French countryside outside the window. And before you know it, you're screeching into Paris. Amazing. It's just fun to use the infrastructure in Europe. I was recently in Munich taking pictures of trains coming into the station, actually taking pictures of what were cute little birds squished onto the windshields of these trains. When I looked at that little bird, I thought two things. I thought, first, this is a dangerous continent if you happen to be a slow bird. And then I thought, this is a surreal image. You'd wait all your life to see. You just wouldn't see that where I live. I don't know about Delaware, but in Seattle, you don't see birds squished onto train windows. I could imagine where I live, a train or a bird sitting on the roof of a train in a folding chair with a cigarette and a glass of wine, you know. But not squished onto the windshield. That only happens in places like Europe. I just think that's fun to check out. Now, in our travels, we do see some signs like this occasionally, and this is hurtful, I understand. I've been teaching travel and taking groups around Europe for 30 years, and, you know, depending on the war and the president and the trade policies, there's always people upset with us. First of all, this is not anti-you or anti-me. People are inclined to like us until we give them reason not to. It's amazing to me that they cut us in as much slack as they do. You know, I was in Germany when they had that picture of the Abu Ghraib torture victim on the cover of Der Spiegel. It was like Time magazine, torture, America, terrible victim. And people didn't hold me personally accountable for that. They were amazed that we would do that, but I was okay as an individual. People like us as individuals, and people like the ideals of America. Most Americans, that's what we're proud of, is, you know, freedom, free enterprise, freedom of religion, pluralism, all that kind of stuff. These are ideals that are shiny on a mountaintop that are bigger than any trade policy or any war of choice or any president, okay? And these are always respected. That's the American ideal. When you see this, in my experience, it's people who are upset about an American military adventure or a trade policy, okay? And these come and go all the time, and people want to vent, and they're frustrated, and they'll just put graffiti out like that. And, you know, you just got to understand their position. It doesn't matter what I think or what you think. It really matters what the other 96% of humanity thinks when it comes to these things. 96% of humanity looks at us, and they see a very wealthy empire that is crazed for military. I mean, we are 4% of this planet, and we spend as much as everybody else put together on our military. I mean, that's an amazing thought. And even in very tough times, we will compromise the environment, the parks, the schools, anything before we would ever compromise our military, which is already as expensive as the rest of the world put together. Only the United States can declare somebody else's natural resources on the opposite side of the planet vital to our, quote, national security interest. People wish we were candid enough to say vital to our custom material lifestyle. So this is an interesting issue. And again, it doesn't matter what I think. I'm just explaining what other people think when they look at us. Again, half the world's trying to live on $2 a day. There is one organization of nations that tries to deal with some international problems, of course, the United Nations. When they have a vote on things that matter to the desperate half of humanity, very typically the vote results is 140 to 4. Issues like water, child labor restrictions, landmines, third world debt relief. 140 to 4, we lose. Who stands with us? Israel, Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. I try to be credible, and this seems incredible to me. So I go to the UN website every year, and 30 or 40 times, even in the age of Obama, we're outvoted 140 to 4 on issues that matter to desperately poor people. That's not good for the brand of America. People, get upset about that. They get frustrated by it. We have trade policies that are really brutal on poor people. I mean, they're just mean-spirited, and we don't even think about it. Free enterprise, that's our religion. If my cat has more buying power than your daughter, screw your daughter. My cat gets the tuna. And when you're trying to raise kids south of the border, the good food comes up for our cats. That's free enterprise if you're on the receiving end of globalization. It's complicated. It's just not easy, right or wrong. But if you're struggling to survive, you're aware of these trade policies. If you're in Haiti, you look out over vast fields that used to be planted with rice. Now nobody bothers to plant them anymore because there's a shack over here selling rice cheaper than anybody could ever grow it in Haiti because of government-subsidized farms in the United States. We pay our farmers they dump it down there, and it demoralizes the local farmers, and the people are having to buy imported food, and they don't have anything to grow in their own fields. That's a major problem if you're down there, not if you're a farmer receiving that, or not if you're a politician trying to get their vote. When I'm really into drug policy and drug policy reform, and when I leave, there's a hippie kind of squatter community in Copenhagen called Christiania, where kids run around with hand-woven sweaters, and people homeschool, and they live in geodesic domes and smoke a lot of marijuana. And every time I leave Christiania, my Danish friends say, be careful with your marijuana. Here in Denmark, we have to arrest a couple of pot smokers every year in order to maintain favored trade status with the United States of America. We don't want to arrest them, but if we don't, we can lose our favored trade status. The United States has actually written a treaty that everybody in the United Nations had to sign that requires all nations to declare a trade war on any nation that dares legalize marijuana and treat it as a civil liberty or a health challenge instead of a criminal one. So that's just one small example, but there's countless examples like that that frustrate people outside of our borders that at least we need to respect. There are reasons that people would be upset with our trade policies. You do not need to accessorize this way. Many Americans do, and I just think it's silly. I've never had to hide the fact that I'm an American. People like us. They want to talk, and unless you're going to go over there and try to teach them how to do it, they're probably going to like you. That's our goal in our travels, is to understand and respect other people's ways of doing things. A lot of Americans are frustrated with especially the French, because they won't support us in our wars, and they kind of think, well, we've saved them from Hitler. Aren't they thankful for that? They are thankful for that. I could give a whole talk on anecdotal examples of how the Europeans are very thankful for us saving them from communism and from fascism. In fact, I was filming recently in Burgundy, and I was going to a mom-and-pop chateau, a wonderful little castle I've been visiting for years with our tour groups, and this charming aristocratic couple had the chateau in their family for generations, and we were coming in, the sun was going down. Hi, can I get up on the rooftop? I got to get a shot of the ramparts while there's still some light on it. No, we have American film crew here. We must have a little party. But the sun's going down. I got to get on the roof. No, sit down. We got some wine for you. Okay, so I sit down, here comes the fine wine and the nice cheese and crackers, and then they bring out the 48-star American flag. It's like a religious relic. The flag they hoisted over their village on that day in 1944 when they were liberated from Nazi tyranny by American GIs. And they said, we will never have an American in our castle without sharing our 48-star flag and thanking you. And go home and tell your neighbors too. We're so thankful for the strength and the love and the heroism and the valor of America in our darkest days. You see, my point is, they're very thankful for that. It's kind of amazing how they still have that. On the other hand, they're proud and they know what war is and they have their own foreign policy and they're not going to follow us in lockstep. And I hope that's not a precondition of our friendship with them. There's a lot of concern about terrorism and how safe are you traveling here and there and so on. And while I'm the first one that'd be concerned about major terrorist problems within our country, mass terrorism and so on, I certainly don't want to make light of that. I do want to make light of Americans' inability to get a grip on what's the statistical risk of you being a victim of a terrorist when you travel overseas as an individual or even a school group. 12 million Americans go to Europe every year, 12 million come back. None are hurt by terrorists. Tomorrow, if an American is beheaded by a jihadist in Madrid, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. We lose 1,000 people on our streets every month, year after year. It's going to happen for the rest of our lives. 1,000 people are shot on the streets of America, innocent people, every month, because we like guns. Now, you could make a very good case that 1,000 people a month is a reasonable price for 300 million people to pay to have the right to bear arms. I mean, we're a well-educated, completely free society, and we affirm that every year. And that's just what it did. We're a mighty big nation. 300 million people, it cost 13,000 people a year to have that right. The Europeans, on the other hand, decided not to have that right, and they lose 1/16 the people we do to violence on their streets. It's just a societal choice. The odd thing is, Americans stay home because they're nervous to go overseas. My European friends laugh out loud when they hear that American is staying home for safety reasons. If you care about your loved ones, you will take them to Europe tomorrow. We just really need to not let the news make fools out of us. It's charming to think we have news, but our news is entertainment. It cost millions of dollars to get a good enough looking anchor woman for us to actually sit there and hear all this stuff. And it really is turned into lots of hysteria and excitement so that we keep watching and they can charge enough ads to net a profit. You see, it has become entertainment. I love it, but I don't let it mess up my worldview. That's the important thing. We've got to understand that as we let the media wire our outlook that it is entertainment, and we can't let it keep us home. If you hate terrorism as much as I do, I think you can understand that the most valuable thing we can do as individual Americans is travel a lot. Learn about other people. Let them learn about us. When we travel, it makes it tougher for their propaganda to demonize us. And it also makes it more difficult for our propaganda to demonize them. If everybody would travel, this world would be a much safer place, I think. Now, when you travel, you realize that everybody has their own 4th of July. It seems kind of elementary, but I actually grew up thinking 4th of July was unique. Of course, every nation's got it. May 17, they're going crazy in Norway. August 1st, it's Switzerland. 10 days after our 4th of July, Bastille Day, July 14th. It's fun to be in countries on their national holiday. Until well into my adulthood, I thought the world was a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to figure out how to get there. I really believed until well into my adulthood that if they couldn't figure it out, we, because we care and know, have every right to elect a president for them that does understand it properly. And then I traveled and I realized that everybody doesn't have the American dream. Different people find different truths to be self-evident and God-given. Norwegians have the Norwegian dream. Bulgarians have the Bulgarian dream. These people have the Sri Lankan dream. And that's a beautiful thing. That's not unpatriotic to acknowledge that other people don't aspire to the same things we do. You know, in the United States, when we say well-being, it's always preceded by material. Material-well-being. Well, that's not always the case. In Scandinavia, they've got other ways to measure well-being that would be subversive here in our society, and we really need to respect that. I'm impressed when I travel how much spine people have, how much pride there is out there. It's very humbling and very exciting. I was once going through Afghanistan, and I was in Kabul, and I was just having lunch in a cafeteria where most of the travelers go. And a man sat down next to me, and he said, "Can I join you?" I said, "You already have." He said, "Are you an American?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a professor here in Afghanistan, and I want you to know that a third of the people on this planet eat with spoons and forks like you. A third of the people eat with chopsticks, and a third of the people eat with their fingers like I do, and we're all civilized just the same." I remember he said it exactly there, "and we're all civilized just the same." And I thought, you've got a chip on your shoulder about this, don't you? But then I thought about it a little later, and I thought, he's right. I thought less of him because he ate with his fingers. And for the rest of my trip through South Asia, I went to fancy restaurants filled with professional, well-dressed local people where there were no spoons and forks. And there was a ceremonial sink in the middle of the dining hall, and people would wash their hands and use their fingers as God intended them to be used, to nourish themselves. In fact, it got quite natural. In fact, I had to be retrained when I got home. But I just find that beautifully humbling. When you're traveling, you realize Nathan Hale, Patrick Henry, Ethan Allen, those are great guys. They wish they had more than one life to give for their country, but they're not unique. Every country's got their own Nathan Hales, and every year 10 languages go extinct. And they don't always do it politely. We had our little stage when we could be rude and shoot in from the bushes. And then we beat the redcoats, and we've kind of come the redcoats now. But there's other societies that are desperate about their lifestyle. They don't want regime change. They're going to do desperate things to try to stop that. And it's not always polite. And it's important for us to at least recognize where they're coming from. I was traveling with a tour bus as an assistant tour guide, one of our tours through eastern Turkey. And in eastern Turkey, you don't have a list of famous things to see. You're on a cultural scavenger hunt, and you're just out looking for stuff. And we found a high school stadium filled with kids having a pep rally. We stopped the bus, go in, 200 kids thrusting their fist up in the sky and screaming together in unison, "We are a secular nation. We are a secular nation." And I thought, oh, wow, a pep rally for secularity. And I asked my guide, "What's wrong? Don't these people here like God?" And she said, "No, we love God here in Turkey, but given the rising tide of Islamic fundamentalism just over the border to the east, we're very concerned about the fragile and precious separation of mosque and state that Ataturk gave us with our constitution back in the 1920s. And they're having a pep rally for the separation of mosque and state." And I thought, wow, I never even thought about separation of mosque and state. It is so fun to get out there and recognize the struggle these people have. I think it's really a good exercise to try to empathize or get excited about a contemporary Nathan Hale. And there's plenty of contemporary Nathan Hales to get your brain around as you travel. I remember I've done 4 trips down to Central America during the Sandinista Contra times and more recently, trying to follow and understand the economic struggles of peasants down there. And Archbishop Oscar Romero is a good example of a contemporary Nathan Hale, I would say. He, of course, stood by the landless peasants when they're having their civil war. Remember the Contra War and the Sandinistas and El Salvador, all that kind of stuff. Basically, we think of it as communist against freedom lovers. But down there, if you were a landless peasant, you would think it's a struggle for local people to own land, as opposed to whoever's got the most money gets to own land. Because if you have free enterprise, whoever has the most money buys all the land. And they want to make a return on their investment, so they're certainly not going to grow rice and beans for local consumption. They're going to grow fancy stuff to ship to the United States. And then there's going to be no food grown locally and no land to till locally, so the peasants have to work on the plantation for plantation wages to export profitable stuff to the States, so the landowners get a lot of money, and the only thing for the local peasants to eat is canned food imported from the United States. It's a pretty vicious cycle. That's called cash cropping, and that was getting out of hand, and they didn't want a government that was in cahoots with the landowners, so the peasants were trying to have a little more say in things, and of course that's a communist revolt, and they have to fight the United States in that regard. Well, Archbishop Romero stood with the peasants, and he said, "I'm going to get shot, I'll be killed, but I'll rise again in my people." And he was shot, assassinated, and he rose in his people. And it's an amazing thing to witness. I was down there when he was active, and I was down there for the 25th anniversary of his assassination. As a matter of fact, I was scheduled to go to Mazatlan with my family for a nice vacation, and I was ready for a vacation. I was fantasizing about a pristine stretch of tropical beach, swept free of local riffraff, just me and my wealthy white friends, all alone there with plastic straps around our wrists so we could have all the margaritas we wanted and not even dirty our fingers in the local coins. It was going to be the trip of a lifetime. And then my friends invited me to go to El Salvador for the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Romero on that same week. And I told my family, I'm not going to be any fun on the beach. Sorry, I got to go to El Salvador. It's cheaper, perfectly safe, life-changing, perverse. Nobody does it. Everybody goes to Mazatlan. Nobody does it. Why? I don't understand why. I mean, it's just curiosity. It's just getting excited about people's struggles and being part of the action. Anybody can do it. 2 days into that trip, I was marching with 10,000 people. I was covered with bug bites. I was eating rice and beans one day and beans and rice the next, with all these people remembering Archbishop Oscar Romero. In the capital, San Salvador, we came to this monument. Looked at this monument and I thought, wait a minute, this is our monument. This is the Vietnam Memorial. Nope, this is the Salvadoran monument. Just like the Vietnam Memorial, just as many names chipped into that black marble. Each one of those names is somebody who died fighting you and me. Maybe they were communist and we had to kill them all. I don't want to get involved in that discussion, but the fact is there's baggage there. Here's a little country of 4 or 5 million people that lost 50,000 people in a war fighting us. That's baggage. We got 9/11 baggage. They got Civil War baggage. I am so fascinated by the baggage that other people live with. That's why I wanted to go to Iran. A few years ago, I went to Iran, and people asked me, why did you go to Iran? And I thought about it, and I thought, the reason I'm going here is because I think it's good character to know people before you bomb them. Sometimes we have to kill people. I'm not a pacifist. We have to have a military for good reason. But it should hurt when you do that. And it's the inclination of any military power to dehumanize their enemies, so when good people kill people, they don't lose any sleep over it. Think about how powerful it is when you know somebody. Remember the cute blonde girl that was kidnapped in Aruba? What was her name? Natalie. We all know her name. Wasn't she adorable? No, she wasn't any more adorable than any other kid that we've ever killed. There's 250,000 Natalies right now in bare feet in the winter on the border of Afghanistan, living in tents with dirt floors, with sick grandparents and no parents left. Those are Natalies too, because of 9/11. It's complicated. There's no easy solution, but I'm tired of Natalie. I really want to celebrate the people who are faceless and don't look like us. If you happen to be a Christian, it makes sense. I mean, we're all made in God's image. We're all equally precious. I don't buy this exceptional stuff that Natalie matters more, So I wanted to go to Iran and understand 70 million Iranians. How can these people vote for a guy like Ahmadinejad? I really wanted to figure that out. I was scared. I almost left my big camera in Athens thinking people would throw stones at us when they saw an American film crew working on the streets of Tehran. Thank goodness I brought my big camera in. I've never been received so warmly when I've been working anywhere in my travels as when I was in Tehran. It blew me away. I couldn't believe it. We made a 1-hour TV show on public television. I don't know if you've seen it, but it airs all over the country. You can see it occasionally. If you ever want to watch it, you can just go to Hulu and type in Rick Steves in Iran. But it's a 1-hour primer to Iranian culture. I stayed away from all of the tough issues, Baha'is, adulteresses, funding terrorists, nuclear bombs, Israel, all that kind of stuff. 60 Minutes can handle that. I just wanted to humanize 70 million Iranians. I went there because I'm supposed to know stuff, and all I knew about Iran was what I learned from Ted Koppel. Probably a lot of you too. We followed it every night. That was a media circus. They bust in those people to shake their fist at the camera. Designed to do just what it did, radicalize everybody. The Iranians, they have history going back a little farther. At least it goes back to 1953 when they had a charismatic, democratically elected prime minister named Mossadegh. He came in and he broke the rules. He nationalized their oil. Imagine the people who own it wanting to control how it's sold. Unacceptable. Britain and the United States arranged a coup, get rid of Mossadegh, put in the Shah. And then for the next 40 years or whatever, you got the Shah. And, you know, for the peasants and the people and the salt of the earth people around, they don't care that much about oil. They just care about their values and how their kids are going to be raised. And the Shah was the West. When the Shah was on the throne in Tehran, they were bragging the miniskirts are shorter in Tehran than they were in Paris. This is what regime change means to a lot of people. Western values being put on their society. And from their frightened perspective, that's not very good. Now, I was in Iran, and it's an awkward situation because you have all these hateful graffiti posters. I mean, look at this, an 8-story tall American flag, down with the USA, not stars and stripes, but dropping bombs and skulls. Very painful to be there. But then you got this confusing friendliness. Now, this has been up there for 30 years, and then down in a traffic jam, I'm just stuck in the traffic jam. A lot of traffic jams in Tehran because there's 12 million people in that city and very few traffic lights. Stuck in the middle of this big traffic jam, finally, just silence sitting there, and the man in the next car, I'll never forget, asked my driver to roll down the window, did that, handed over a bouquet of flowers, and he said, "Give this to the foreigner in your back seat and apologize for your traffic." I don't know about Delaware, but that never happens in Seattle. Later on, I was in another traffic jam. It was just silent, and suddenly my driver, the Iranian driver, just blurted out, he said, "Death to traffic." And I thought, wait a minute, I thought it was death to Israel or death to America. He said, no, right now it's death to traffic. And I said, well, why is that? What's the deal? And he said, well, here in Iran, when anything's really frustrating to us and out of our control, we say death to that. And he was doing his best to explain this to me. And I thought, you know, he speaks Farsi. He doesn't speak English. He's just a driver. He speaks very stilted English. And he's trying to explain that. And death to really means damn. I thought, damn. We say damn this, damn that. You know, I don't know about you, but have you ever thought, damn those teenagers? You know, do you really want them to die and burn in hell for an eternity? No, it's just after midnight. Turn down the music. Damn those teenagers. Damn election fraud. Damn Obama. Death to Ahmadinejad. It's the same thing. This is what people say. And I just think it behooves America to have a little more sophisticated understanding of things than just a silly bumper sticker when it means dragging our nation into a war. That's one of the reasons I wanted to go there. It's an amazing country. I wish I could give a whole talk on Iran. It's a fascinating thing. On my website, you can Google it and see my talk about Iran, of the stuff that I learned, because I was really steep on the learning curve, and it was fascinating. About baggage. You know, we talk about baggage. We Americans lost 2,800 people 12 years ago. Terrible thing. Well, Iran lost hundreds of thousands of people when a guy named Saddam Hussein, running a country called Iraq, invaded them. And Saddam Hussein was funded by the United States. Now, maybe we don't want to believe that, but it doesn't matter. Iran believes it. America funded Saddam Hussein, who invaded them, and they lost 200,000 or 300,000 people. They got 1/4 of our population. That's the equivalent of us losing 1 million people. That's baggage. And today when you go to Iran, you've got what they call martyrs' cemeteries in every town. Vast cemeteries. And what is amazing to me is these cemeteries are as lively today with mourners as if it was 20 or 30 years ago when these people were buried. This mother is sitting on the tomb of her son or her husband or her child, sobbing like she does every week. And that's baggage. That's baggage. And we got to deal with that. I was on the streets of Iran, of Shiraz or Isfahan or one of these great cities, and just doing my work. I remember a woman, a well-dressed professional woman, came across the street. She came right up to me and she said, "Are you an American journalist?" And I said, "Yes." And she did one of these things on my chest. She said, "I want you to go home and tell the truth. We're united, we're strong, and we just don't want our little girls to be raised like Britney Spears." I thought, we got something in common here. And I thought about this, and it was so interesting to me. And it just occurred to me that people, over my visit, and in little anecdotes like that, I figured out how Ahmadinejad can get 51% of the vote. The fancy cosmopolitan people in Tehran don't vote for him. He's kept in power by his political base, which is small town, less educated fundamentalists, motivated by the same thing their counterparts are here in the United States. They're good people motivated by fear and love. They care about their little girls. If you were an Iranian and you understood the influence of the West, you would not want a regime change, because if the Shah is back on the throne, your little girl becomes a boy toy, a crass materialist, and a drug addict. I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying that's their mindset. Americans are really quick to put down Iranians because of the way they treat their women. They look at us and they say women in bikinis on revolving pedestals at car shows selling hot rods. And they don't think that's very respectful to women. So they'd rather have their women covered up. We'd rather have our women peeled out and showing off to sell stuff to us. It's just two different ways of treating women. So it's complicated, and it's worth learning about. And you don't get this information unless you seek it out yourself. That's what's interesting about some of these issues. This shot just reminds me of the fun I had in Iran. It was so just great to meet real people. And we'd always go to these famous monuments and palaces and so on. They'd always have school groups there, and I'd love to take shots of the school groups. And I'll still remember the teacher of these girls. I can hear her barking to her kids. I don't speak Farsi, but I know what she was saying. She was saying, "Girls, this Western gentleman's going to take your photograph, and you look like a bunch of floozies. Now cover your hair." So they all cover their hair and get looking good, and then they can be taken their photograph. No problem, as long as you're looking respectful, you see. So it's interesting, and I think it's nice to learn about that and not just take whatever they tell us. We are really excited about liberty, and in some places they think they've got a lot of liberty too. In Salvador Dali's hometown, Cadaqués in Spain, they've got double the liberty. All over Europe, you find people celebrating their way of living, and I'm so charmed by it. Here in Verona, they have a festival every summer where the older kids teach the younger kids how to make a beautiful ravioli. That's just a neat way of passing down a tradition. In a little town in France, here in Burgundy, this Chamber of Commerce thinks it's worth investing in these orbs so people can smell the fine differences between the different wines that they make there. A good nose is a life skill worth having in this small town in France. In much of Europe, people are happy to pay too much for a loaf of bread in order to buy it from the person who baked it. That's family values for them. That's the culture. That's the fabric of their culture. It's a beautiful thing. The Europeans love their fine wine, and they know where to fill it up cheap. The cheapest liquid you can buy in Italy is table wine at a filling station. People come in with a car with a bunch of empty jugs, and 3 times a year they fill them all up and go home with it, and that's just a fun part of their culture. I am fascinated by how we Americans are pretty quick to legislate morality. I'm not sure where that comes from, but I think that's something we're really good at, is legislating morality. Now, everybody in this, morality is a good thing, and everybody in this room is a moral person, but I bet every person in here has a different morality. And if you had the power to say, this is the morality and that's the law, that'd be a problem for some other people here. Now, in Europe, my friends tell me a society has to make a choice. Tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. And then they always remind me, you Americans lock up 10 times as many people per capita as we do. Either you are inherently more criminal or you've got some screwy laws. And I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but I'd favor the latter. When you go to Europe, you find, for instance, legal prostitution. All over Europe, you'll find brothels, legal, taxed, regulated. Nobody would say prostitution's a good thing. Prostitution's a sad, ugly thing. But there's always going to be lonely, horny men willing to buy sex and women willing to sell it. That's just a fact. It can be a capital offense, and it's still going to happen. And you can decide how you're going to deal with it. Now, again, I'm not saying what's right and wrong. But in Europe, the notion is we can treat these persistent problems with a goal of pragmatic harm reduction rather than moralizing and locking people up. So, in the case of most of Europe, prostitutes are legal, they're unionized, they're regulated. You can't have your license unless you're checked by a doctor so you're not spreading diseases. You run your little business, renting a little spot with a red light here in Amsterdam, and when you push your emergency buzzer because you got a dangerous client, you're not rescued by a pimp, but you're rescued by a policeman. That's just, it doesn't work quite that well, but that's the hope, and that's the goal, and that's a European style. And it's an interesting tourist attraction. Now, I was recently in a restaurant in Zurich in Switzerland, had to go downstairs to the bathroom, stepped into the bathroom, blue lights. Blue lights, it confused me for a minute, and then I remembered, oh yeah, blue lights. I cannot see my veins. Couldn't shoot up if I wanted to. Very clever. Now, I've been taking tours around Europe for 3 decades, and a lot of times my tourists will say, look at all these junkies. Man, these liberal Europeans, they got a lot of drug problems, don't they? Well, the difference is their junkies are still alive and they're not in jail. You know, we lost 18,000 people to heroin overdoses last year. Europe lost 8,000. Just 2 different ways to handle the problem. Their word for addiction is enslavement. People are enslaved to drugs. And they treat them as sick people rather than criminals. It's a different approach to a very persistent and real problem. Across the street from that restaurant, there was a machine that used to sell cigarettes. Now it sells government-subsidized syringes, almost free. A lot of Americans say, you can't give needles out like that. That's condoning this terrible activity. Europeans would say, hey, people are sharing needles and they're passing HIV. Let's just provide the needles so we can minimize the harm that this terrible sickness is causing. Complicated, but there's 2 different approaches to it. Now when I go around Swiss cities, I keep seeing these machines everywhere. I never noticed them before. They're just there. Down the street, not a main street, but a little quiet alley, there's a busy little cafe fix. That's what they call their heroin maintenance clinics. And it's a place where wasted, scary-looking drug addicts go to get counseling, to get their heroin addiction maintained, and to help get their lives back on track. So it's a very interesting situation. I've been real busy in marijuana drug reform in Washington State. We just legalized marijuana this year along with Colorado, and we're going to tax it and regulate it. And we firmly believe that use will not go up. We'll just take the money out of the crimes and the organized crimes and the gangs, and we'll tax it. And we'll treat the mature, responsible adult use of marijuana as a civil liberty, and we'll keep it away from kids, and we'll throw the book at anybody who drives intoxicated by anything. It's just a smart, pragmatic way to deal with a reality. You know, 40 million Americans like marijuana. You gonna lock them up? No. You gonna lock poor people up and black people up? Sure. You know, it's just a good way to disenfranchise people you don't want voting. It's a real ugly thing the more you learn about this. Now, Europeans, thank you. Thank you. It's a fascinating thing. I've been able to speak out on marijuana policy for 10 years. I'm a board member of NORML, in part because I can't be fired and nobody needs to vote for me. Some people, every once in a blue moon, they'll say, we know what you think about marijuana, we're not going to take your tours. And I just think Europe's going to be more fun without you. So, but it has been an interesting story, and in the last year I've been really busy on this in Washington State, but I was a co-sponsor of our initiative Initiative 502, and the people that worked with me were federal prosecutors, city attorneys, sheriffs, legislators, judges, public health officials, professors, not a bunch of potheads, people that really don't even smoke pot, but they just see a real problem in our society. It's the prohibition of our age, and it's very expensive, and it's racist, and it's counterproductive. A lot of people think there's a whole reservoir of people that would love to ruin their lives smoking pot if it was just legal. Fact is, anybody who wants to smoke pot does. I don't think there's going to be an increase in use when people legalize it and regulate it. I just think there'll be less criminals and a little more honesty. It's been 30 or 40 years since the Dutch have arrested a pot smoker. It's just in the coffee shop there and there if you want it. And by every estimate, our governments and their governments, the Dutch smoke about half per capita what Americans do. In every case, when you compare societies and how much they smoke, it has nothing to do with the strictness of the laws. The Portuguese, 10 years ago, decriminalized the consumption of all drugs, hard and soft, because they had a terrible hard drug addicted population. Little country Portugal had 100,000 hard drug addicts. They said, we got to stop criminalizing this and treat it as a health problem and an education challenge. 10 years later, the people who were against that law, the conservatives, are in power. They assessed how it's worked for that society, and they loved the results, and they re-upped it. Because in 10 years, their hard drug-addicted population has been cut in half. Now they have 50,000. They've saved millions of dollars. Police are dealing with more serious problems. Drug addicts are dealing with counselors and nurses and doctors instead of lawyers and judges and cops. And there's been none of the drug tourism that they feared. And marijuana use has not gone up. It's called Law 30 in Portugal. It's interesting to study that. The Europeans have found that the only thing gateway about marijuana is its illegality. A lot of Americans say, oh, it's innocuous. Of course, we smoked it when we were kids, but now it's stronger. You need one little token, you're on your way to heroin addiction. That's just nonsense. The Europeans have found the only thing gateway about marijuana is the fact that it's illegal. Because then, if people want to buy it, they got to buy it from criminals on the street who have a vested interest in getting you hooked on something more addictive and more profitable. So, it's a complicated issue. I could give a whole talk on it, I'd love to, but I don't have time tonight. But you can Google Rick Steves and marijuana and and hear all you want about it. If you go to YouTube and just go Rick Steves Spokane, you can hear the talk I gave in the east half of our state about this and get this sense of that. But, you know, you learn these kind of things when you talk to other people who are dealing with the same problems. That's the fascinating thing for me. You go to Europe and you find out, you know, it's just not that big a deal. What kind of joint do you want to buy? When I try to compare the United States and Europe, it's really interesting because there's real difference between us, but we're so similar. We're both like the same, we're like cousins. We're rich, we're Christian, we're capitalist, we're really into government by, for, and of the people, but we're different. What is the difference? And when I think about it, it seems like, this is my theory, in the United States, we're really enthusiastic about government by, for, and of the people via the corporations that we own. It's not a judgmental thing. I mean, you can make a very good case. The purpose of a government is to create a good business environment so the corporations we own can prosper. I am so thankful I'm running my business here in the United States. It's a dream compared to if I had to run it in Europe. I'd be demoralized in Europe. I'd have nowhere near the fun or the profit or the employment. I wouldn't employ as many people in Europe. It's a problem over there, okay? In Europe, they have government by, for, and of the people in spite of the corporations they own. In Europe, the government will go to bat for sustainability, you know, poor people, the future, the environment, stuff like that, that doesn't get a vote in the corporate boardroom. And it's just their style. I find that it's very interesting when you go to Europe, if you want to study Europe, to see Europe in the extreme, you go to Scandinavia. Scandinavia is the most highly taxed part of Europe. It's the least church-going part of Europe. It's the most affluent and best educated part of Europe. And it's also, by every measure, every time they do a survey, it's the most content people on the planet. What's with these crazy Scandinavians? So you go up there and you talk to them, and they don't go to church, but they're humanists. Instead of a church on the main square, you see a city hall on the main square. In Stockholm or in Oslo, you got these towering buildings. Instead of a spire, you've got a bell tower. You got a nave where everybody gathers. You got a pulpit or a lectern instead of a pulpit. Instead of mosaics with great big Bible stories, you got mosaics on the wall that trumpet the heroic contribution of wonderful citizens that have been a big part of their society. It's a beautiful kind of humanism, and it's just fun to explore that with your Scandinavian friends when you travel. I've got soundboards all over Europe, people I get to talk to and bounce ideas off of. This is my friend Ollie. Ollie is a school teacher in a little village high in the Alps where everybody has the same last name. It's a little peasant school village. He's a big city guy they brought in to the one-room schoolhouse, and I hang out with Ollie and his family. One day I told Ollie, you know, I would be so frustrated if I had to pay such high taxes as you. How can you Swiss people so docilely pay these high taxes over here? And without missing a beat, he just said, well, what's it worth to live in a country where there's no homelessness, no hunger, and where everybody, regardless of how wealthy their parents are, has access to quality health care and education? That's just his way of thinking. He's not a liberal. He's just a normal Swiss guy that has that ethic. So to me, that's challenging, and that's interesting to talk to people like that. And I know that Americans are really compassionate and good and loving people, but one thing we're not very good at is being honest about the gap between rich and poor. For some reason, I think in part it comes from our Red Scare, Cold War heritage, where we can't talk in terms of class warfare and disadvantaged class kind of stuff. But when you travel, you realize there's a huge gap between rich and poor, and it's growing. There's a gap in our country, and there's a gap between us and the developing world, and it's getting worse. And if you travel with open eyes, open window, like I have all my adult life, you've got the grubby little fingers of these people reaching India, reminding you there's a real world out there. And I think it's fascinating. And what I've learned in my travels is even if you're motivated only by greed, if you know what's good for you, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world. It's just not a nice place to raise your kids. I was just down in Central America for Christmas and New Year's. El Salvador, Nicaragua, Mexico City. And I found, like I knew before, any middle-class neighborhood has to pool its money and have an armed guard on the street corner so kids can go out to the park. There's an armed guard in front of every bank, every pharmacy, and every hotel. And I just don't want that in my society. But if we're honest, and we can't be honest because of a lot of complicated reasons, but if we could just figure out a way to deal with the gap between rich and poor, we'd still have plenty of filthy rich people who'd be all happy and stressed out about how they can spend more money and get happier. But it would be more palatable for the health of our society across the board, and that is our challenge. You just don't want to live behind designer fortifications like people in less developed countries do when they are in the economic elite. And when you travel, you realize these little kids are just as precious as our little kids. That's the slam dunk thing when you do it for the children, you know. These are the children. It's not, I mean, my daughter has $5,000 for straight teeth and money left over for whitener. And I noticed that every kid in her class had the wherewithal to scrape together $5,000 for straight teeth and money left over for whitener. And that's right. We have a winning system. I work hard. My girl gets straight teeth. No guilt trip. That's okay. That doesn't negate the reality that for the cost of 2 sets of braces, you could drill a well in a thirsty village where all the moms have to walk half their waking hours, abandoning their kids just to get water every day. Imagine that. $10,000, drill a well, and all those moms, instead of walking across the county, can walk across the street to get their families water. Now, many Americans are motivated by national security. We're just scared to death that somebody's going to take our stuff. Well, if you really care about national security, think about soft power instead of all this hard power. What would be the value to drill a well in a community that could be radicalized against us? It cost $1 million to keep a soldier in Afghanistan. You could drill 100 wells for the cost of that one soldier and give water to 100 thirsty communities. And then every day, all the moms would walk across the street instead of across the county. And every time they pumped water for their family, they would be thinking, God bless America. That's a good investment if all you care about is your own national security. It's a radical concept. It'll never happen because nobody here is going to make money off of it when you drill a well there, like they do when you put a soldier over there. But it is worth thinking about, and someday I think we need to grapple with that. There's all sorts of complicated issues we got to deal with. It's kind of exciting. We got, violent, angry Islam we got to deal with. That's not going to go away easy. We got to get smart about that. We got climate change. We got that gap between rich and poor. And especially as teachers here, we got the opportunity to raise a younger, well-educated generation that has an empathy for people outside of our borders, where we can build more bridges and fewer walls, and that's an exciting thing. Let me just close with just kind of an image that I really like as a tour guide. As a tour guide, one of my favorite things to do is to take groups around Turkey. I just love Turkey because it's a moderate, Western-looking Islamic nation filled with devout Muslims, and we can meet them and get a little better understanding, a little less fear. I was with one of our tour groups once, and I wanted my groups to get to know a dervish. You know, dervishes are those monks that get all dizzy. It's kind of like cruise ship entertainment. They spin around and around. And I met this dervish, and I said, hi, I'm an American tour guide, and I've got 20 tourists here, and we want to watch you pray. Is that okay? Can we see a whirl? And he said, I'm not a photo op. but I will let you watch me pray if I can explain to you what I'm doing. I said, great. So he said, up on the roof. So we all went up on the roof, and he got into his monk's outfit like he does 5 times a day. I'll just paraphrase it. I forget exactly exactly what he said, but the essence was, he was all dressed up in his beautiful outfit. The sun was setting, all of Turkey outside of us there. 20 people gathered around. He says, I'm a dervish. That's a follower of Mevlana or Rumi. He's kind of like the St. Francis for Muslims, you know, a prophet of love, easy to get your brain around, everybody likes him. And 5 times a day, I get into a meditative trance by whirling, and I think about his teachings. I plant 1 foot in my community, my home, my family, my loved ones. The other foot goes around acknowledging the wonderful diversity and variety on this beautiful planet that God has blessed us with. One hand goes up to accept the love of our Maker. The other hand goes down like the spout of a tea kettle, showering God's love on his creation. And I whirl, and I lose myself in that idea. And we watched him, and he whirled, and his robe billowed out, his head tilted over, and he lost himself in that amazing idea. And he became a conduit of God's love. And I watched the faces of my tourists looking at him. And as a tour guide, man, I was really happy, because these Americans were learning that this guy, different as he may be, he's also fundamentally the same. And we can go home and he's a little less scary. And if we take that little bit of better understanding of our world home, and then we implement that as citizens of this great planet, that's making travel a political act. And I think that is the most beautiful souvenir. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I was told I had till 9 o'clock. That means I got 4 more minutes. So I would just do. I don't want to keep you late, but if I could just for 5 minutes or something, answer questions, and then afterwards, I'd love to hang out in the lobby and I'll autograph or whatever you like. It'd be nice to meet you there. Once more, if you needed a handout for my road trip, this is my first stop on a 12-city and 12-day road trip. This is what we're doing, and I think there's a discount on our tours here, and just it's news about all the stuff we're doing in my office. You're welcome to grab that. There's also some in the back table out there, and I have some the DVDs with my budget travel lecture here, and my friend Keith is out in the lobby with other handouts if you didn't get them. But I'll just take a couple of questions before we call it a day, if there's anything you wanted to talk about. Yeah, in the back.
Not a question. My wife and I are going to Cuba next Tuesday.
Oh, good. They're going to Cuba next Tuesday. A lot of Americans say, can you go to Cuba? It's the most popular destination in the Caribbean for Canadians and Germans. And a lot of Americans don't think you can go there. I'm glad you're going there. It was like Iran. A lot of Americans don't know you can go to Iran, but it's like going to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. You can go, but you have to have a tour. You're welcome to get a visa. Our government's got no problem with it. And there are good organizations that take people to Iran. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Thank you so much to introduce my country, Iran.
Thank you.
I hope someday in the future, very near future, Iran and the United States become united by people like you bringing the good things from that country to here and good things from this country to there. That's what I tell my son to do that, and that's his job.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. That's people power, and I think we can be hopeful for that, especially our children, you know. Beautiful. Thank you. Anything else? Yeah. How many languages do I speak? Only English. Excuse me. I always say in my teaching, it validates, because I'm always talking to monoglots and saying I can do my tours, make my TV shows, write my guidebooks, have a great time traveling almost anywhere, speaking English, because we speak the world's linguistic common denominator. When I was in Tehran, the road signs were in 2 languages, Farsi for the locals, English for everybody else, you know. Everywhere in Europe, I mean, if a Greek meets a Norwegian hiking in the Alps, they're going to communicate in broken English. I certainly, because I know there's some foreign study teachers here, I don't want to minimize the importance of learning a language, but I don't want you to not go somewhere because you think there's a language barrier. You can travel there. If you speak the language, you'll have a much better connection. I think it's also important to learn the history and the culture and the art, too, and that connects you in a similar way. What was your other comment or question? Oh, yeah, about local guides. That's a very good point. I'm going to Europe. I go to Europe for 4 months out of the year. As I think I mentioned, I spend 2/3 of that time researching. I'm alone. I'll be 80 days this year researching my guidebooks, updating them by visiting every place personally. Probably out of those 80 days, I'll hire a private guide for 50 days. I always get different guides. I like to pick different brains every time I go to a town. Out of those 50 guides, they'll all be worth the time and money, and half of them will be worth recommending, and I put them in my books. But I would skip dinner, and I would find some people to share the cost, but I would hire private guides as much as you can in your travels. It's a luxury. And the interesting thing is, the more valuable the private guide, the cheaper they get. It's very expensive in London, very cheap in Poland or Turkey or Morocco. And that's where you really need a guide. I'll be going to Egypt next month. I'll be going to Palestine next month, and I'll have guides everywhere I go. I got more guides than I know what to do with. I just email them, and they want to work with me. And you know, it's $100 for a day, and if you can afford it, it's really luxury. Yeah. Oh, that's nice. That is so gratifying to think that some of my shows would end up in your classroom. Thank you for that. Our Christmas special goes to 7 different countries, and you can watch that. You can just go to Hulu and watch that, or you can tape it or whatever. Yeah. Question here. Is that right? Good. All right. Okay. Well, it's a small world. That's nice. What's my last trip? If it was my last, well, I hate to think about that, but if I was gonna, you know, sometimes in Europe, I don't get sick, but I get fried mentally. I just get burned out because I am like a little kid in a candy store and I can't stop going. It's kind of ridiculous, and I just don't learn. So I just get burned out, and I have to what I call convalesce. And when I need to convalesce, I go to the Mosel River in Germany, a little town called Beilstein. It's just so beautiful and peaceful, and it's almost, I feel like everybody is wearing slippers and robes, you know. And then in Italy, I go to Lake Como, Lago di Como, and I stay in Varenna. Those are beautiful places to really settle down. But I'm really thankful that wherever I go, almost wherever I go, I'm very excited to be there. I mean, I'm going to be in South Portugal. I'm going to be in St. Petersburg. I'm going to be in Prague. I'm going to be in the Scottish Highlands this summer. And I'm excited about all that, even though my favorite country in Europe is Italy, you see. I would say the best 4 cities if you want a 1-week winter break. It's a beautiful thing. Just one airfare, settle into one hotel, really get into a great city, and then fly home. London, Paris, Rome, and Istanbul. Either of those are great that way. Yeah, and that's some fun thing to think about. Yeah. We took our kids to Europe every year for 20 years, whether they liked it or not. They didn't act like they liked it, but now they are avid travelers. They're 22 and 26. In fact, my son Andy lives basically out of a rucksack in youth hostels in Europe, running a business out of his laptop. He runs a tour program for students in Europe. Foreign study kids always get Friday off. So they always get a 3-day weekend. And when I was a kid, it was too expensive to fly anywhere. You'd never do it. Now, it's cheaper to fly than to take the bus. And kids know how to book these discount airlines. You can go round trip for $50 anywhere, anytime in Europe if you book in advance and you know how. So Andy arranges $250 3-day weekends for foreign study Americans at the 6 greatest cities in Europe. And he's not competing directly with me yet, but I'm keeping an eye on him. But I think it's great to expose kids to that. And then, like my parents dragged me to Europe. and then they may like it, and it may give them it makes your world a little more open and broad and exciting and accessible. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I think that's probably a nice final comment. I'll quit while I'm ahead. I want to remind you, I live in Seattle and I get to talk to people all the time, and so I don't get to Delaware very often, and it is a delight to be here. Congratulations to the University of Delaware for being a leader in foreign study, and it's really, for me, a thrill to be a part of this 90th anniversary of this commitment to having the students here become better citizens of the planet. Thank you very much, and happy travels.